Well, we've been talking a little bit about our mission and how God has a plan and purpose for our life. We started this series called Shadow Mission with discussing the life of Esther. And Esther is just such an amazing, courageous, young teenage girl who saved the day. Saved all the men in the story, saved a nation, and was part of God protecting His redemptive plan for you and for me. What an amazing character she was. She could have been tempted to follow her shadow mission to just be a pretty face, to be a beauty pageant winner and a beauty pageant contestant. But instead, she decided that she would live her life for a vision to die for, a vision that God had called her to. In fact, she said, if I perish, I perish. And that vision drove her to her knees, and she invited other people to pray for her because she recognized this is something bigger than myself. Last week we talked about Moses, and Moses' insecurities was something that just kind of kept him to himself, and his shadow mission was obscurity and just kind of an easy, comfortable life. He didn't want to be challenged, but God had a different plan, and he encountered Jesus and the Lord in a burning bush experience that he had where God called him again to redeem the Lord's people out of slavery back into freedom. God's calling you in the same way. He's calling you to declare the excellencies of the one who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. That's why we print off these postcards and we give you these invitation cards and we pull these videos together because we want to proclaim the excellencies of the one who called us out of darkness into His marvelous light. Well, my wife left the service last week and she left to do an intensive in Texas. She does these marriage intensives. She's a marriage and family therapist, and she works with couples in crisis, and God uses her in amazing ways. And usually she gets on the plane, and she says, I don't want to really talk to anybody, and she puts her face in a book. But after the message last week, she said, you know what, God, if you have a plan for me, if you can use me in some kind of powerful way to accomplish your purposes and your mission for my life, I'm available. So she gets on the plane, and she's in a middle seat. Don't you love the middle seat? So she gets in the middle seat, and, two college students come up, and one's on her left and one is on her right, and they're part of a choir trip. And they say, we'd like to sit together. Would you like a window seat? And Trisha's like, I'm all about that. So she moves to the window seat, and she could tell they're kind of arguing, and there's some tension, and she picked up that maybe they had a dating relationship or some different things like that. And at one point, the girl kind of says, we need a counselor. And she turns to Trish, no lie. She turns to Trish, she says, you would not happen to be a counselor, would you? And Trish just kind of smiled because all of a sudden God had opened a huge door for her. And so for the next 2 hours on that flight, Trish poured her life into these two young college students. And God used her in powerful ways. All because she said, I want to be part of God's mission. I want to be part of God's plan. And we're all confronted with little shadow missions all throughout our week, aren't we? We'd like to be comfortable. We don't want to be interrupted. We don't want to be inconvenienced. We don't want to be challenged. And yet God has bigger plans and purposes for us. What if you said, God, when I walk out of the service today, when I enter my week, can you use me? Even if it means I'm a little inconvenienced, even if it means I'm put out of my comfort zone, can you use me to change somebody's life? Because I believe that God wants to use you and has called you to declare the greatness of the one who called you out of darkness into His marvelous light. All of us have that common mission, that common calling. And what a powerful thing it is. Well, this morning we're going to talk about Samson. How many of you have ever heard the story of Samson? Samson was one of the most powerful men who ever lived. He had such physical strength and authority. He was what the Bible calls a judge in these early times of the nation of Israel. They didn't have kings and they didn't have court systems and things like that, but there were leaders that emerged, and they called them judges. In fact, Judges is one of the books in the Bible, and it's where we find the story of Samson. And Samson is in his Samson is in his kind of notorious battle with the chief enemy of the Israelites in the Old Testament. You know who they were? The Philistines. The Philistines, they were the bad guys in the story for many, many books of the Bible. And the Philistines had really ruled over the Israelites at this time, this nation that God is building. But the Philistines were a much more powerful nation. And all of a sudden, God calls this family to have this child that's born into them, this barren woman who is visited by an angel, and God promises that she would have a son, and that son would be Samson later on in the story. And so we pick up the story in Judges chapter 13, verse 5, because there's a unique condition that the angel gives for this particular child. This child is supposed to take what the Bible calls a Nazirite vow. And the Nazirite vow was usually something that was for a small period of time. It was just a time of consecration and someone just devoting themselves to God. And they had unique kind of restrictions upon them. But for Samson, these restrictions were for his entire life. And so we see in verse 4, it says, "Now see to it that you drink no wine or other fermented drink, and that you do not eat anything unclean. And you will become pregnant and have a son whose head is never to be touched by a razor, because the boy is to be a Nazirite, dedicated to God from the womb. He will take the lead in delivering Israel from the hand of the Philistines." And so this vow is upon Samson's life, his entire life. And Samson grows up, and he's so physically strong and has such authority that he emerges as this judge. But he breaks the vows that he made before God in pretty close order in sequence. And you'll see in Judges chapter 14, verse 8, it says sometimes later he goes and he kills a lion. He tears the lion apart with his bare hands. Can you imagine doing that? It would take such power. But sometimes later, the next day, he sees this. Sometimes later, he went back to marry her, this girl that he had become betrothed to, and he turned aside to look at the lion's carcass, and in it he saw a swarm of bees and some honey. Now, this is just nasty. And so he scoops out the honey with his hands and ate it as he went along. So he has this vow that he's not supposed to touch anything unclean, no dead body, for his entire life. And yet he just completely disregards this vow that he made to God by scooping this honey out of this dead lion's carcass. Judges chapter 14, verse 10, it says, Now he went with his father down to see the woman, and there Samson had a feast as it was customary for young men. Remember, part of the Nazirite vow was that he was supposed to drink no fermented drink. So no alcohol, no wine of any kind, and yet here he is having this kind of lavish party with the Philistines that he'd invited, because he's betrothed to this Philistine woman, and they just get drunk and wasted, and he makes all kinds of unwise decisions. He creates this riddle with all the Philistines that are there, and all kinds of trouble emerges, but he breaks, again, the second Nazirite vow. And then he gets in trouble with another woman, and her name was Delilah. That's right. Delilah was the Philistine woman who kind of got intertwined with Samson's life, and she kept asking him the secret of his power, because Samson at this point in the story had won many battles against the Philistines. In fact, it says that he had killed not hundreds, but thousands of them. At one time, during one significant battle, he killed 1,000 men with the jawbone of a donkey, of all the weapons that you could pick. Jawbone of a donkey. And so the Philistines went to this Philistine woman, Delilah, and said, "You've got to get him to tell us the secret of his power. What's the secret?" And so, over time, you know the story, he's worn down, and he tells her, if I'm bound with new ropes. And then he's like, no, if I'm bound with old ropes. And slowly but surely, he gets down to the last vow that he's not broken, the vow of not shaving his hair. In fact, the Bible records that his hair was very, very long, never been cut. then is woven in 7 braids. And so in Judges chapter 16, she caresses him, whispers sweet nothings into his ear, and loves on him. And after putting him to sleep on her lap, she called for someone to shave off the 7 braids of his hair. And so began to subdue him. And his strength left him. Judges chapter 16, verse 20 says, she says, "Samson, the Philistines are upon you, get up!" She had done this numerous times before. He awoke from his sleep and thought, I'll go at as before, and I'll just shake my bonds free. He said one of the saddest statements that you could ever find in the Bible. He did not know that the Lord had left him. Samson, who had all the giftedness in the world. Samson, who had all this physical power, all this authority, he had all the goods. But he had no idea that God had left him. That the presence of God had escaped his thoughts and escaped his life. You know, in our culture, we make an idol of giftedness. It's been a few years ago since we had a president, and they actually argued, does character really matter? After this president had made numerous moral choices that were highly questionable. Does character matter? We want to elevate giftedness when someone sings real good, or they communicate real good, or they're a talented leader, or they're talented in business, or they're singing all that success. We applaud all of those things. There's numerous books about how to be better at all of these things and how to get these accolades and applause, but there is very, very few concentration in our culture about developing character. And giftedness is something that we lift up and we pursue, and even in church settings or in ministry settings, there's all kinds of things that we do, that we elevate somebody who has high giftedness, but then after a while, sometimes we find out that they have very, very low character. And most of the time when this equation happens of high giftedness and low character, there's a fall that takes place. A moral collapse where marriages completely shattered, families are broken apart, fortunes are drawn down to zero, even health things begin to happen in that person's life. We learn that the weight of lavish giftedness in the absence of character will crush us every single time. Character is the one thing that is the foundation of our life. And I want to just share this morning in our time together some just foundational principles about developing character that we can learn from the life of Samson. First one is idolizing giftedness leads to envy, insecurity, and pride. But Christ-like character is so good, even the desiring of it cannot harm us. You know, the thing about it is that character is one of those indirect qualities. It's like humility. You ever tried to pursue humility, and then you think you get it, and you're like, man, I wish everybody was humble like me, because I'm awesome. Happiness is like that too. It's an indirect quality. If you pursue happiness, you'll never find it. But rather, humility and happiness is the byproduct of something else that you pursue. Character is a lot like that. You can pursue it, and you can't over-pursue it. You can envy somebody for their talent. You can envy somebody for the wealth. You can envy somebody for the car that they drive. You can envy somebody for the success that they have or the fame that they have. But envying somebody's good character is not a bad thing. It's a good thing. And you can pursue and desire it all that you want. The next principle that we want to talk about, the success of giftedness can mask the erosion of character. The success of giftedness can mask